Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures, a show where my guests and I get to explore entrepreneurial stories, problem spaces, market landscapes, and examine together how new ventures, either for-profits, nonprofits, or personal ventures, might be able to be created to benefit humanity. Really, this show is meant to inspire a new generation of venture builders and venture investors to identify new market opportunities and new products and services that can be built. In today's episode, we're going to be examining all things period equity, period care, products and services for individuals who have periods. And my guest, Rachael Kim, she's an amazing entrepreneur with an incredible backstory that we get into today. And her new venture is all about providing access, care, stories, education, and connecting a community of people who can talk about this issue in a way that does not make it taboo and in a way that will empower individuals all around the world. So if you're listening to this show, you can watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see show notes and links to resources that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can listen to it anywhere that you get your podcasts. So with that, please enjoy this important and wide-ranging conversation with Rachael Kim. All right, Rachael, welcome. Glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
I'm excited for this conversation. Would you start and tell us a little about yourself and your journey thus far?
Yeah, so I am originally from the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in a very small farmland called Puyallup. So it's a suburb of Seattle. Really had some early entrepreneurial beginnings at the age of 9. So I actually started teaching violin back then. And when people ask about my startup journey, a lot of it, what you'll see is I talk about it after my consulting career of 10 years. But if I really truly think about my entrepreneurial leanings, I had it as early as the age of 9 just to find my way. Yeah, in terms of about me, at the age of 18, left for Chicago, went to Northwestern, London School of Economics. And that's where I landed myself in consulting. And it was a prime mortgage crisis time where, the iBanking jobs were less available. But for me, it was really just trying to understand what options and which industries I wanted to go into. And at the age of 21, 22, I wasn't sure. I had graduated with a political science and economics double degree. And I did not think I would go into tech, but I did. And, I spent majority of that time working across different stakeholders to not only talk about business strategy and their data and information security around it, but then tying that back into the more technical teams and technical stakeholders to making that happen. And so I started out of Chicago and went into London and really had a global career from there. By the time I left, which was on my 10-year anniversary, I was one of the global data privacy experts, and I actually had built up also within my firm their the GDPR offering and their data privacy offering. So it's been a while since then. It's been a couple of years. I needed to do a reset. Took 10 months to backpack around the world, and then I started my current endeavor, which is Project Untaboo. And I really came across it because I kept having issues of access, and there access to product and access to information around that. And although historically I've always had that issue when I was traveling for work, I had never thought about it as a problem to solve. But as I was speaking with other travelers, spoke with other friends, and I came back to do, some market research pilots. When I came back to Seattle, I realized, especially with if period end of sentence, the short film that won the Oscar, it just made me realize that we're in a different position now culturally to be able to talk about period equity and not only menstrual health problems, but I would say health for marginalized or underrepresented and under-researched communities. And yes, women are a part of that, but that's not the holistic view. So that's a little bit about me and sort of what I'm up to currently.
So a lot to dive into there. So with regard to your just in your personal journey, I'd love to go actually all the way back to the starting the violin teaching business.
Yes.
What did you learn even back then at a super young age? What were sort of the principles that kind of stuck with you in the entrepreneurial journey?
So I was concert master within my own elementary school orchestra. And what I realized is if you have a key skill that other people want or need,
Mm.
they will hire you. And I think it gave me a little bit of confidence to ask to get paid for that, right? So, and I was highly recommended. I had a support system where the orchestra teacher at that time also recommended me to other parents. I would do solos, and so parents would actually come up to her and ask her, like, how, who does she go to, or does she teach at all? And so, a support network, a niche skill set, and I think having the courage just to ask to get paid were probably the core three things I realized. And just understanding, at the age of 9, I was very, I would say, a little bit more quiet. I mean, I was, did sports. I did a lot of did well in my academics, but I would say I was always been reserved. And so for me, that's where I truly felt the start of my confidence building in order to be an entrepreneur. Now, do I think that ends now? No. I think we're consistent works in progress, and we're always going to try and be better than who we were yesterday. But for me, those would be the three cornerstones of entrepreneurship from that started at the age of 9.
And then fast forward, so you're in Chicago, and then you spent 10 years in London. So
Yeah. So across Chicago and London, I spent 10 years with my previous firm, but then I also traveled around for, I would say, another year. So roughly not quite 10 years within London, but coming into subprime mortgage crisis again, I started as a systems analyst. Clients were slashing chargeability, they didn't have money, and for consulting firms, they were actually letting people go. So people who were already had contract. Now, I was lucky to still have my contract, but I had to show that I needed to add value. And I fell into a role where I was backfilling for an information security response team internally, where I started forensic investigations. You start working with data privacy lawyers. Again, falling into a very niche skill set at 2008, 2009 was known, but it wasn't quite well respected across industry. I think people were looking at cost optimization, cost reduction, and also embracing the concept of cloud, which was still relatively new in terms of how our clients were being used. So after about a year and getting promoted, I realized that it was a very niche skill set. That even during subprime mortgage crisis, I contacted people out of London because they had a security consulting practice there, and just started having conversations and actually creating a role for me because they also understood that there is money to be made because technology will always evolve and security will always be one step behind. Right? People want to protect not only their assets, information, but also avoid fraud. And so there's many aspects of security that are valuable, but it's just about education and understanding sort of the network of people who are like you. And I found that, and they actually gave me an offer during this crazy time. I waited until 2010, 2011 to make the jump, but I had the conversations as early as 2009, I would say. And everybody knew when I first came into the company that I had wanted to move. So part of it is letting people be aware of your aspirations. After going to London School of Economics, I really wanted to go back to London. For me, that's where I felt that I had grown the most and had the ability to do so with a wider set of opportunities than Chicago. And Chicago is a great city, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. But London is where I would consider I found myself as an adult, and I grew significantly. So it's an amazing chapter in my life. But yeah. And that's sort of where it all started. And I would say how there's some entrepreneurial threads of just advocate for yourself. And if you don't see an opportunity, how you can create one if you have the right network, and just letting other people know of what you want to do.
All right, so you find yourself in London, and then the whole GDPR thing hits. Talk a little bit about that, and how did you help? What were the types of services you were doing and clients you were helping?
Well, it's funny that you say it just hit because it didn't. I mean, it really grew out of the data protection directive out of the EU, and it had been in the works for a long time. Now, the fact that it was for clients, a lot of them, it just hit them was more of an awareness piece, an education piece, which we did a lot of. But I was, I mean, from my first project within London, I was doing data protection work, just being able to enable things like for a global resource client, so they can monitor their employees and their assets, right? So if you have pipelines of oil and maps, you know, they need to be protected, but you also need to respect the rights of the employees and what you've contracted with them. And how do you work if you're a global organization? So really from the start, I had already started that work. Now GDPR, did that really mean from the old world of the EU data protection directive and the actual regulation in itself, which we now have in the new world? It really, one, modernized the concept of data privacy to accommodate technologies like cloud. So it had constantly struggled, and that's why you had the cookies regulation, and it was really to modernize law and make it flexible enough to see what potentially could be on the horizon to be able to encompass it. Because before then, there was just so much discussion within the working parties, as well as, you know, Netherlands, to be able to say, okay, do cookies fall under data protection? What is our cookies personal data? Is IP personal data? And that delineation had been in constant debate for a long time. So GDPR was one, being able to set a broader definition, I think clear lines, but also a risk-based approach. So understanding that the directive in itself, the way that they had each member country, like Germany or the UK, had their own data privacy laws. Now, there's a difference in the amount of implementation. Austria, Switzerland, or not only EU, but EA, were known to be much more stringent, which means more money and investment. And to accommodate that and make it still easy enough for businesses to own, provide transparency and governance around, that was recognized that GDPR would at least help alleviate some of that and be able to modernize it in that way. Now, there's another set of GDPR that's really key, is really also enhancing individuals' rights. So data subject access rights. So that your consent notification, being able to opt in or double opt in, the fact that you should be able to be aware of what information, and it's not just your name and address, you're talking about metadata. And in the world of IoT, in the world of so many technologies that are coming together and being able to form these data sets around you and trying to profile you as a person and what your preferences are, there needs to also be a mindfulness around that. And I truly believe that GDPR helps set that tone around at least the awareness of it, so then the individual is empowered to make a decision. Do you get to keep my data, or do I withdraw my consent for you to delete it? So now, what did that mean for our clients? It really meant majority of business strategies around technology. All technology runs on data. So I was involved from the very get-go, from business strategy and data strategy conversations, and getting the teams together to define how GDPR was then interpreted, right? Because you're talking about legal, so you're working with lawyers, you're working with HR, but you're also trying to say, is this going to be a business process? Is this going to be a technical control within the system that my engineers need to code, right? So being able to figure out that whole strategy and mobilization of teams. So then once you have a lower level or a deep niche of requirements set, then they can just be executed against. So my role was really a lot of that upfront work
Mm.
So then once you have the teams in place with a defined set of requirements, lower level to coding, that it be executed against. So now that typically across 10 years, 20 plus clients across all different types of industries. I spent a lot of time in banking, a lot of time in global resources, and I did, public and communications and media and tech. But it was an amazing set of 10 years where I got to do exactly what I had initially set out to do at 21, 22, which to see different industries and see how that was applied. Because yes, you have a same set of principles to go by within GDPR, but the question is, how do you apply that within each client context? Because it's different. If you're a new company and everything is on the cloud, some things are a lot easier to implement. All of the clients we dealt with was they needed a huge amount of transformation because a lot of their systems were still on COBOL, for example. I mean, how do you manage that? And so within the services, it was not only the strategy and transformation part. We helped a lot of our clients, actually get funding, do the education piece, because that was really important. I think now people understand GDPR is important, but still are grasping what that means for their own company or for their employees, and what it means actually even now within COVID. Because we are seeing, I would say, competing interests of public interest, public good, in contact tracing, for example, versus the privacy of the individual.
Mm.
So yes, I did. That's a little tidbit around my 10 years within consulting and sort of what I did.
So you were in the thick of it. You're in London. You're going through all the huge conversation in the 2010s and obviously in the 2020s here. But then you decide to take a different route and go on a journey around the world. This is a common story. A lot of entrepreneurs is this journey. Obviously, right now it's going to be difficult, but assuming in the future it becomes available for people to take such a journey, maybe what did you learn? Where did you go? How did you take time to reflect during that time, and kind of what advice would you have for others considering that in the future?
Well, I recognize that after 10 years as well, it was a great chapter in my life, but you change as a person. And when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to understand how you changed and where your goals are and where your heart truly lies. And travel for me has always been that grounding sense, particularly when you backpack, of going back to basic human needs. And I think sometimes that's really easy to ignore when you're flying around speaking with clients, is understanding your basic human needs as a person. So for me, travel grounded me again in terms of understanding my body, mental, emotional, physical sense and awareness, and then also seeing just different cultures and how people operate. And how, for me, it was good to reconnect with a sense of humanity. I think, again, with corporate jobs, with traveling around, you connect, but there's a different level of, I would say, intimacy and acknowledgement in the human experience when you travel. And so I was very, very lucky to just say I recognize as myself that I cannot no longer do this as of right now. I need to recognize where I am as a human being and where I want to go. And so traveling for 10 months across 4 different continents really did help me do that, because of the people I met and were part of my journey, but also a lot of the alone time where I think being in other cultures also forces you to understand where your values are and where you want to be. And I got to do that over 10 months. And again, you're a constant work in progress. So has that evolved since I started that journey? Yes. But what it made me realize is, in terms of, it was great to do privacy, and it's still a part of my company within Project Untaboo, to be able for individuals to be empowered with what kind of information they give, but also that they are powered by information to make their best decisions for their lives. But also the fact that period equity is very important for me, and it was just something that I hadn't called out, and it made me think about all the situations where I was in a board meeting and I would be the only woman or the only individual with a period, and I would have to be presenting to someone, but in the back of my mind, thinking, "Oh, I need to be in the, I need to go to the bathroom," and just that change in culture, the fact that we don't acknowledge the human experience or bodily functions, right, within the workplace back then, really, and there's a physical and psychological impact to that was something I ruminated over a long time. But then, reading Melinda Gates' book, watching Period End of Sentence, and just talking with other people really culminated to a point where in August, September of last year, I was like, okay, I've, I'm going to try. I'm going to do this. Do I have a perfect plan? No, but I'm a true believer in just seeing where it goes. And I think being in the startup world, that's what they tell you, right? Test and fail. I think there's a mindfulness, particularly when it comes to health, about testing and failing. But at the same point, you are your worst enemy. And a lot of people stop themselves from really achieving, I think, their mission in life. But I am just seeing, really, a year later, if it was just me and the idea, I would say, okay, clearly I did not figure something out. But the fact that I have a team who supports me and volunteers, the fact that there's an amazing community here in Seattle who have also rallied around the idea, quietly, because we are still building and we've had to pivot due to COVID, which has a whole other set of things to deal with, has kept me going. I think it's always great for you to have a mission, but it's about, again, that support network around you and the fact that you are solving a problem. And for us, the problem we're solving for individuals with periods now is access to information, particularly about period care products. So having it consolidated in one platform, trusting the reviews around that so that they can make the best decisions. And it's not just about women, it's about individuals with periods. So non-binary, people in transition, that it's a wider human experience than what we've originally categorized as.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about the threads that came together that prompted you to start the venture. So what kind of the origin story? You said you're impacted by Melinda Gates' book, and there were some other things that came together. Tell us a little bit more about that story.
Yeah, so I mean, I was visiting a friend in LA, and she and I had talked about sort of key problems to solve. And I said, well, when I was backpacking a lot, what was most frustrating is no matter how much I planned, I don't have access to peer care products within the travel and tourism industry. Hmm. And if you do have access to it, it's in bulk, right? So it's not really packaged in a way for the best human experience. And that was, and using sustainable materials like hemp and bamboo to be able to do that, because it does have a huge impact. I mean, if you have plastic that takes 10 plus years to biodegrade, or even cotton takes at least anywhere from a month to 6 months within product, you understand, especially what I've seen with it across industries of 10 years, there are better ways to innovate, and we just haven't applied it in this space. And it's been black box for a long time. The tampon was 1933, pads were 1800s in terms of the original products that were developed. And yes, there have been incremental innovations such as the string in itself on a tampon, but we are at a point where for what we've accelerated in the last 10 years within tech, how have we not applied this within this space?
So then what was your original vision for the company? Before COVID hit, how did you start out? And maybe tell us a little bit about what the pivot looked like.
So it originally started out as us being manufacturers of eco-aware period products for the travel enthusiasts. So being able to address that product gap within the travel and tourism industry, not only with hotels, but if you go on a plane, have you ever seen the products? If you're lucky, you get a pad that's probably what your mother used to wear in the 1970s, right? When they had their periods. It really is one of those things where if there is product, is extremely limited, it's dated, but there was actually a lack of product. And it's really if you've ever experienced it where you start your period regardless, you have an emotional and physical response. This is not just a lack of product. There is a human experience around it where you're constantly stressed, but we're taught to act like nothing's happening at the same time while sort of frantically searching. And I had that, whether particularly on my 33rd birthday, for example, in Angkor Wat, no access, right? There's no product. And if you're lucky, you MacGyver a tampon out of toilet paper. I mean, that's sort of the human experience that we're dealing with in those channels. Now with COVID, travel and tourism's down. There still is a need for product. However, we went back to our research because our mission has always been to boldly innovate new cycles for period equity. And so we went back to a different problem of just access to information, right? So, and that is, I think, a more powerful aspect, because if you are aware of what products are out there and services are out there first, and how can that be applied to you, then you can make your choices around product in itself. So for us, we went back to the information aspect, and we took us a while because I needed to make sure that parts of my team had jobs. We went through going from 14 to 10 to 6, and then ramping up a different team for this more content driven platform where we will be providing, peer care reviews in one place. So it's to save time of the individual. If you ever looked at for peer care products, people spend hours trying to go from brand to brand, trying to see, and people trust customer reviews around that, but it's not consolidated in one place. I think the best version you have of that is maybe Amazon, and that's because the sheer number of products. But that's curated for the human experience around having a period. I think that's something that that came out in some of our initial pilots, that they would be seeking something platform this. So we are in a better place now through everything to be able to address that. So it's relatively new.
So let's talk about the problem more globally. I'm aware in certain parts of the world, this is a significant social justice issue, because
Yes.
individuals with periods have trouble getting to school, or have trouble sustaining education, which contributes to cycles of poverty. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and help inform those listening in and watching in about the problem.
Yeah. So what you'll find around period care is a lot of it has to do with your environment and context. So, and here in the U.S., disposables work, menstrual cups work because we have easy access to water. If you're going to Africa or India, a lot of this time it's not only individuals being stopped from going to school because the whole shame aspect or the taboo aspect around it, they're also taken advantage of. So we, on our blog, a teacher wrote about his experiences where he actually saw, because of myths around the period, another male teacher take advantage of a young girl, because he said that having sex with him would mean that the period would go away. Like, it's not just around education, it's around safety, it's around hygiene. Like, this is again a human experience that really isn't talked about. But in terms of I think what's being experienced in India and Africa, it's really around what's the context. So wash, so having running access to water, having a safe bathroom to go to where people aren't peeking in, or the fact that you wouldn't be boxed in by men. I mean, there are a lot of stories around this, and that are now coming to light around this issue. But it's, in terms of social justice, it's a multi-pronged discussion point. And education is definitely a big part of that. And that's how you empower individuals to, one, know it's a natural body function, to then understanding based upon their lifestyle and what is available to them, what is the best way to address it. I mean, in India, for example, there's a lot of shame where people reuse rags and it's never washed because they don't have access to running water and soap. So what are the situations or products that are better available to them that would suit their situation. So that just sort of a couple of tidbits of it's education is definitely one of them, but it impacts an individual with a period in many different ways.
So specifically in those areas of the world, what are the options? What innovation is happening? What kind of education is still needed to get out there? What kind of programs are happening? I don't know. I don't know too much about that world. I don't know if many of our listeners do either. So we're curious to learn.
Yeah. So PATH actually is a global health organization, also based out of Seattle, but they have a global reach. They have a menstrual care area. And so within Nepal or India, they started doing education around just hygiene and understanding your body. That's just really how basic it is. And I would say, even as an individual in the US, I'm still figuring out what a period means for me. I mean, there's again, there hasn't been a lot of research in this area. So if we're here and I'm still figuring stuff out because research maybe hasn't happened in the last 5-10 years, if we're lucky to say, how do you think that kind of information is being disseminated in India and Nepal? So there are some education programs that they're providing. The fact that Melinda Gates Foundation also supports PATH with this endeavor. You see SOFI, so you're seeing new innovations around using agricultural byproducts. So SOFI uses, I believe, banana leaf, just using local resources to be able to pull these together. And so it's not only organic cotton, which is, I would say, a luxury here in the US. You're talking about just finding other materials that act like cotton. They are absorbent, but they can be locally sourced and created and also sanitized in a way. Because if you are reusing the same pad, cloth pad or cloths, which they do in India and Nepal, I mean, there's a lot of infections that comes with that, and also reproductive health. For an individual with a period, that's the most sensitive and receptive part of their body, and yet that is what they have access to. I think in terms of wash, where you have clean toilets, you have safe toilets within Africa or India being put in, again, supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's actually a step in innovation with regards to that experience. But I would say one of the biggest ones really is looking at other materials, other local materials to develop disposable and non-disposable. Because if you have access to consistent running water, then you can start thinking about menstrual cups. Then you can start thinking about discs. There are other options then available. But if you don't, then you're really looking at more disposable options, like pads in particular, tampons, because you're also dealing with cultural relevance and cultural acceptance of products, right? It's not just, if we throw a tampon in India, people use it. No. A lot of it has to do with the fact that even when you grow up here, the concept of a tampon is very intimidating because you're inserting it in a very sensitive area. And a lot of that takes education and speaking with other individuals who've done it to be able to say, okay, I think I'm going to try it. Well, if you're in a country like where they either haven't had previous access to it, you don't really have a lot of people talking about it because there's shame associated with it. It really comes down to you. And so through education and empowerment of the individual, I think that's a great first step. But then again, building the infrastructure to enable, I would say, just overall hygiene and well-being, it will open up, I would say, access to more sustainable and reusable products.
So your current venture then has pivoted in light of the pandemic and has been much more emphasis on education. Tell us a little bit about that. Where can people find information now? What kind of stories do you have around the impact and the things that you're hearing from people that you're serving?
So we have started providing content on our website, which is projectuntaboo.com. But the intention is that we are in transition. So we're building out a platform that will be launched towards the end of this year to just start building together peer reviews, but also pulling together content creators. So some stories we have called Period Real Talk, which just talks about the reality of a period that you don't really hear about. So one is that story about the teacher who actually taught. The second, you will hear about someone trying their menstrual cup for the first time. And I think the intimacy of someone's point of view is something that people can connect to, because I think there's it should be evidence-based and there should be data driving it. But again, it's a human experience, and it's that previous lack of connection that I think has attributed to the lack of innovation within this area previously. But as you've seen, and femtech is going to grow. I mean, it's going to, in 2030, it's supposed to be over $3 billion dollars in market, and 2050, 50 billion, right? So this is not something that's small. People are recognizing the fact that this area needs to be addressed, and period care is only a small portion of this, right? Because you're dealing with lifestyle, you're dealing with fertility overall. It's just really, again, what I truly believe is the underrepresented and under-researched areas of the human experience within health. And the rise of telehealth, I think, will change that too.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar, what is femtech? I mean, what is the landscape? What does that term even mean these days?
So, I mean, the femtech was initially coined by Ida Tin. So she founded Clue, and that was in 2016. And it was really she had initially said it for people to understand, women in particular, to understand and accept their bodies. And I think you've seen that empowerment over time. I've evolved that because we don't say women in our text. We say individuals with periods because it really is about marginalized and under-researched groups. So taking them to the LGBTQ and trans community as well, because not only women have periods. But femtech really covers, I would say, a broad spectrum, again, fertility solutions, pregnancy and motherhood. So like NERCs, the birth control, being able to look at just your sexual and gynecological health, chronic diseases. So there's what people don't really talk about is, there's cancer and heart disease actually associated with the lack of hygiene, or can, particularly with your reproductive system if you don't take care of it. And there's also lifestyle and wellness. So those are, I would say, the top 5, and Rachael definitely talks about this in greater detail. But again, it's an expansive area that we'll see over, I would say, in the next 5-10 years.
And so, yeah, with such a rapidly expanding market, I mean, where do you see it going? What is the outlook in the coming decade and beyond? And what sort of things are you hopeful for?
So what I am hopeful for, in terms of, you'll see the fact that with telehealth, you're now putting the onus, but also the empowerment of the individual to take charge of their own health, right? So they're making it accessible through an app. And I think with that, the rise of telehealth means that there's also an extension of your life, right? So instead of saying, well, period care is only from 18 to 40, there's this whole other life cycle part around perimenopause and menopause, where if we're living longer than 80, it's no longer just half of our lives, that we actually have to address, I would say, reproductive and sexual health from a more holistic view. So that's part of the one thing I see. I think there's also just change in access points. So before the pandemic, I think we saw a lot of shared services around transportation. I suspect after we have a vaccine within the next couple of years, that will resume. But just instead of having period care products available within gendered bathrooms, having them in ungendered locations. So you've already seen some workplaces providing them in the office supply closet, but also being packaged differently. And I think that's also part of the future of desensitizing, but also making a non-gendered issue, that it's just overall health. And I know that we've talked about femtech, but I think Hims and Hers is a great company where they've also addressed, I would say, health and differently for men. And it's just there's this push for overall wellness and advocacy around your own health. And I think also as part of that, with telehealth and the extension of life and the changes in access points around healthcare, is then understanding the trade-offs around the control of your data. So there is this tension, and people talk about there's the rise of data privacy, and people talk about the downfall of data privacy, because with COVID, you have contact tracing where you're talking about public good versus the privacy of the individual. Now, the shift I see within your data in this space is really understanding the trade-offs that we were not aware of before. Now, it's different because I've seen different clients, how they treat their data, what data sets they have, but they also don't fully understand what's data is in their landscape. I've seen that across the board. So if they don't understand what complete data sets is in their landscapes, how are the consumers going to understand that previously? And I think that's also going to change over time because of not only because of the data privacy laws, I would say consumers are much more savvy, right? So for my email, you will get $5. I will get $5 off. Like that data monetization concept that a lot of firms have previously used will now shift towards the consumer because they are more aware of which data that they're giving, and then actually what are the trade-offs of giving it. So I'm going to give you this my medical history because you are going to be my doctor, but through this app. And that's going to link towards other sources to enable other services for me to be a healthy human being, versus, well, if I don't give you this information, that means I have to physically go into a doctor's office. I mean, it's just that concept of education and understanding the trade-offs is something that I definitely see going forward. I think COVID has definitely accelerated that in some ways because of this tension around privacy of the individual versus public good. But it's that awareness that hasn't existed before, I would say. And a lot of people weren't understanding companies were doing with their data. So I would say those are some of the key aspects I see in the future, and we'll definitely love to be a part of with Project Untaboo.
So let's talk a little bit about the apps and the different services out there, different trackers and whatnot. What do you recommend when people ask you for different technology that they can use in this space?
So it really depends on their lifestyle. And I think this is what it is. It's, we are all used to talking with our mothers or a group of girlfriends or, people who have this experience. But a lot of it comes down to, are you an active person or not? Do you have access to a bathroom or running water? I mean, it really is, what is your lifestyle? And then being able to tailor it to that. So, for example, I know that one of my friends, she's very much a naturalist. She doesn't like to do medications. She's trying to understand how to leverage her period and the different phases of the hormones to be able to train better as an athlete. So there are trainers like that, like Luna Endurance, where I would say once I understand what their lifestyle and what their aim is, I'll recommend. In terms of like an app, for example, I mean, Clue is typically known to be AI driven, more scientific. You have Eve, which is more social, and they not only talk about period, but sexual and reproductive. So part of it is, again, lifestyle and who you are as a person, how comfortable you are talking about it, and what is your aim around it for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So you mentioned the science and ongoing research and your own exploration in terms of what on earth is going on. But maybe talk a little bit about that. Talk about what you're learning, what still needs to be learned, what kind of conversations are you seeing out there on the science?
I mean, within the U.S., I mean, and then even in the 1970s, right, they were talking about, the FDA did not recommend women who were of childbearing potential to be part of research. That's within my parents' generation. In 1986, which was actually the year I was born, was when the NIH actually allowed or even recommended women to be part of research studies or clinical research. So it's only within my lifetime where research has started within areas. Before then, it was research, clinical studies were done on males, and women were previously seen, and individuals with periods were previously seen to be miniature versions of males. But we are in a better place to understand that that's not the case. That you can't just apply some kind of ratio. That it's a completely different kind of human experience within that. Additional research around this area, I mean, it really is. You have consumer femtechs spending about $200 billion a year. So from a market perspective, right, this is part of it. And also, typically, they are responsible for 80% of the household care spending that's done within. So it's, a majority of it is done by women or individuals with peers versus men. The fact that there needs to be more diversity within healthcare, for example, and it's not just women, but again, BIPOC, LGBTQ, to be able to take, I would say, biases out of healthcare research, right? So it's what needs to be done. In a word, or a lot needs to be done. We're in a starting point. I think the exciting part is there are a lot of people entering the space, a lot of startups tackling different sections of the space. And I find that very exciting. I think we all recognize the fact that we need to know more and understand more to be able to provide the services and products required for, I would say, the modern world. Because even before then, I would say we were basically dealing with products and access points, which were maybe fine for the 1980s, 1990s. But if we're talking about the modern individual in 2020 plus, technology is advancing in so many different ways, but also the modern lifestyles. And so the research in the space is even just providing a single platform for education within the U.S. around sexual and reproductive wellness. If you talk to any OBGYN to see what source they provide their patients, there is no single source. And that's really interesting, right? You have the Academy of Pediatricians, you have ACOG, and if they haven't provided this single platform of education that is standardized, I think for me, that's the first and foremost area that should be addressed, right? And part of that is funding research around it, but also being able to build that platform. Now, and there are a couple of companies that have just come out within this past year to say that they're addressing. So Loom is one. But yeah, I think the first and foremost thing is information, the basic information that we were still taught in junior high. I think it's naturally assumed that we should know everything. We really don't. And so I would say we're on the beginning part of that curve of fully understanding what that means. I think the fact that there's more investment in the space is great. The fact that there are more players in the space, because competition really drives that excellence around. And I think that's one of the things the U.S. has always been good about, is using competition to perfect and also create that awareness. Now, other companies and other startup hubs definitely support that, but I think that innovation piece is always key here. So that's what I'm looking forward to. That is what I am hoping to be a part of with Project Untaboo, but also just, there is this wider community that's ever growing and exciting to see.
So the vision and mission of your company, where do you see yourself heading? So you got this a new website coming out. Obviously, it sounds like you have amazing stories and a wealth of research and education materials. Tell us a little bit more about that, and tell us about where you hope to pursue your venture in the next few years here.
Okay. So I'm not going to give you too much on the venture in itself. And that's because we're always talking to users. I think that's a part of it. One, being user-centric and understanding that experiences shift and change as you age. That's going to be a part of our journey too. Where do I see our company in 2-3 years? Honestly, for us, it is going from pre-seed to Series A within 2 or 3 years. And what does that mean? Well, having a platform of which I would say major cities like Seattle, LA, San Francisco Bay Area, New York to start off with, be able to provide this platform, and then growing that into a US wide, because it's online, and then being able to extend that and working in concert with other organizations to build that out globally. Ambitious. Typically you're looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 years. I would say within the first 3 years, the intention is to be fully implemented within the US and having market share. But within the vision and the project and the mission that drives this, it's really being able to unite and drive this conversation so that we can also talk with schools, being able to standardize their education so their students can have access to this information, that we can speak with doctors so that, again, being that single trusted platform within not only peer care products, but also education around that, and being able to just elevate the experience of, when I was in junior high, of what we were taught about a reproductive system in the period to, I would say, a different world, a modern world is what we're driving. And again, that's the whole concept around boldly innovating. And it's not only just to build platform, but become a consumer advocate. So working with manufacturers as well around feedback around their products, and being able to just do that information share. Again, competition is great, but I think we can do this together. And that is what I'm really aiming towards with this company.
And so, just so I understand, who is the customer? So to cruise through pre-seed and seed and get to Series A, get some traction. Yeah. Just so the listeners and viewers understand, who are you going to be selling to here?
So I mean, in terms of what within our initial market research, a lot of it is within the Gen Zs and the millennials. And I think part of it is the cultural awareness around being proactive around your health, but also for individuals like me within the US, we're also rediscovering our health and what's available to us. So in terms of you're looking at 140 million addressable, TAM. And then you're talking about, if we're cutting that down to Gen Zs, just based upon our Pinterest and our Instagram, as well as some of our market research, you're looking at 33.6 million individuals periods. And then, if you're looking at the sort of attainable, again, where we would love to start off is within this, major hubs like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, LA, where sustainability is definitely a part of this as well. So education isn't just around peer care products, it's also what they're made of. Being able to provide that transparency and ownership around that, that fit within our scope.
So it'll be a subscription service then for this demographic?
So for the consumer experience, we are looking at, from a function perspective, a subscription service, not now from an information, because I truly believe that this information should be democratized. That's where I would say we're refining that. But for consumers, we're looking at an initial subscription service.
And then on the B2B side, are there plans on that angle as well?
Yes. So from the B2B side, we're also looking to work with healthcare providers to gain insights, but provide insights. So being able to do some arrangements around that, manufacturers being able to build out, AI-driven data sets within a couple of years, to again help manufacturers and brands understand where the consumers are coming from, in addition to their own market research. And so those are, I would say, more report-driven, more scientific-driven access and data sets.
Awesome. So to those who are maybe a younger audience, those listening and watching, who may not have a great friend group to have conversations about this, who may have just questions, What should they do right now? What would you say to them?
What to do right now? Really, right now they have a wealth of resources across the across Google search, right? So, I mean, in lieu of that, in lieu of it not being on a single platform, I think part of it is just, and we've done these sessions where you speak with a doctor and just talk about all your questions, and just understand that there's no stupid question. We did this with a group of high school and middle schoolers where we had an OBGYN with them and they just asked different questions. And the fact that we used memes to even start the conversation, because a lot of it is creating a comfortable, safe atmosphere.
Sure.
And I talked about my own period journey. So finding other individuals who are very comfortable talking about their periods, I think, is one. I think also understanding what your lifestyle is. Like, are you very active? Are you an athlete? Do you stay home a lot? That changes also, one, you understanding what is the range of normal, and then understanding, like, for you, what product and services you should be looking at. So if someone's much more active, then you're looking at things that you can either hold up a long time or are more disposable from a peer care product perspective. If you're talking from education, a lot of people go to Instagram and YouTube, and you also have NIH research, but a lot of it is, how do you make this consumable? And I would say, in terms of the most popular sources, those are the ones currently being used.
Mm-hmm. So for the ambitious entrepreneurs, those that are interested in approaching this space, what are the low-hanging fruit opportunity that you see, the open spaces that people really should be innovating and building new companies, new products and services in?
Low-hanging fruit. That's an interesting, I feel like that's a loaded question. To enter in the space, there's a lot of investment required. You're talking about healthcare, you're talking about biotech, it's not just health and wellness. So there is a certain amount of investment. But if I was to say what would be exciting to see, it would be to see new products, just particularly with alternative materials. That can be sourced differently than organic cotton. I think, trends are really great, but there are better ways as human beings, as well as better for our planet, that we can address this. So I wouldn't say it's low-hanging fruit, because if you've ever been in CPG, it takes a fair amount of investment. But I think just finding people who are around the idea, I think, will definitely start. Education is always a big one. I think just finding other educators together, even consulting. So, we did that for a session for a middle school within the state, and they found a lot of value because people were able to talk about it afterwards and feel comfortable around there. So education, I think, anything telehealth. If you're just talking about trends, right? Anything telehealth related is typically more scalable. But I do think that, yes, there is initial investment on CPG goods, but once you have it out there's a growing market for it. Part of it is awareness, but I think a lot of it is a different kind of demographic within, the millennials and Gen Zers, where they want to own their health and their wellness for themselves. It's not just a general acceptance of what is. It's really like they want to understand what that means for them.
Yeah. So before you use the term period equality, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I can give you an example. So the simple fact that if you, for me, being in that boardroom, right? The fact that I have to deal with the stress and everything else because of the fact that I couldn't talk about it, nor in the concept of work. Another one is what we mentioned before, is education, that individuals with periods are taken out of school and they miss weeks because of the shame. It creates not only an educational gap, but that has socioeconomic consequences as well. And so when we talk about period equity, and again, we talk about health and safety, right? This is not just a one-dimensional aspect. This has many aspects around the human experience that we're impacted with. So when I say period equality, I would say in the U.S. you really talk about no tampon tax, but it's also education. It's around the equal opportunity to be able to go to school and not have shame, and also financially be impacted eventually. Because if you're not educated, where can you go? You're limited to only a certain work set typically. So for me, that's where period equity really comes from, and it really drives down even further, which is health equity. Yeah. Right? Where if you have individuals making key decisions around health, studies have shown women who are healthier also create better communities. They also give back. There's more economic development around it, and it's nothing against the other genders or gender identities. That's just part of the stats, which also drives down poverty. So for me, period equity is not a simple concept. It's linked to many different things, but those are the things I think about when I wake up every day.
So this is such an important conversation. And obviously, as we've talked about, not a lot of people think about it, and just how holistic, how global, how social, how economic this conversation is. So do you have any final words for, there's investors, entrepreneurs, there are people sitting in innovation groups, incubators, corporate innovation. Any final words for this group of people listening in?
Yeah, it's going to take an alliance across gender identities to make shifts in this industry. I do not see this as a woman-only or woman-driven problem. I do not see it as only, I would say, non-binary. It's going to take everybody across gender identities to make a shift and create new alliances to be able to address what people need in the modern world. And I really encourage that, whether it's just having a conversation with your daughter, your wife, your mother. Everybody has a mother, or just any individual with a period within your family. Just talk to them. I cannot tell you how different the experience is when I've talked to other men or non-binary individuals, where it's just creating that awareness. I think within investors and people who create products, obviously target to market users, but understand you have a wider market than you really realize. And there is, particularly in the transgender and LGBTQ community, there's a whole other different experience you have yet to cater to. And I think that's awareness is starting now. But again, not only is it a huge social impact growth opportunity, but also it does have a mark on your bottom line. At the end of the day, I understand as a business, you run on money, yeah. But we've also seen that if you drive social impact, you drive social good. That also it goes hand in hand.
So you mentioned before you have volunteers. So how can people help you? How can people get involved? People want to connect with what you're up to. What sort of needs do you have currently, and where can people plug in?
Well, for us, it's just please come talk to us about your experience. So we have our website, which you can connect with us, and we'll get in contact with you. We always love to get feedback around people's period-to-care experiences. We also like to connect, and as you've seen, other community members to other investors. It's not just, I don't see it as it's only Project Untaboo thing. It's going to take a community to really change this area. But for us, come visit our website, and we also have an Instagram, Project Untaboo _ and just follow us and give us feedback. That's where we're at right now, because we really do want to curate the human experience around period product selection and education. But just also watch as we grow, because towards the end of the year we will shift to a different website, and then I would say we'll have some fundraising discussions. So for us, it's just being user-centric and understanding what else we haven't considered.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to put links to all those resources and your site and your contact information in the show notes. It's really hard to overemphasize how important this conversation is, and the work that you're doing is amazing. And so we'll look forward to following along, hopefully having future conversations as your company grows. And really appreciate your time. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today.
No, thank you so much, Will. I really enjoyed it.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about health science, emerging technology, software development, startups, and a variety of different topics that we talk about on this show. So you can visit wclittle.com and hit the subscribe button, or you can actually subscribe to specific topics that you care about most. Number two, I have a portfolio company with my partners and I at Proto Ventures called Startup Rocket. If you visit startuprocket.com, there, if you are spinning up a new venture, you can receive customized coaching for your business model and the vertical that you're tackling. And it's a place for you and your teammates and your advisors and your investors to be all on the same page to make sure that you're not missing anything as you go about the important entrepreneurial work that you're about to get yourself into, or that you have been into for quite some time. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're watching, you can listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. And if you're listening, you can visit wclittle.com to view the episodes and check out the show notes for following up in more detail for any of the topics that we talked about. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you watch or listen to this show, that would be super helpful, help get the word out, and helps other people consume and interact with this content. Thank you.